And we're going to save this orange for the vodka tasting later. It's going to come in handy. All right, thank you so much for that. And I want to just say briefly hello to everyone streaming on Zoom. I told my wife, who is at home with our nearly 2-year-old, who couldn't come today, obviously, because he would make too much noise and doesn't listen when I talk. But I told her, I was like, don't worry, you can stream it. And you could just see the lack of enthusiasm on her face. But she has heard me talk about this for a very long time. The story of why I'm here today, I've told a couple of you who came in, I was, for many years, I was the senior writer at Connecticut Magazine. And there, I got to take over a column called CT Files, which was started by a very good friend of mine and former editor at Connecticut Magazine, Ray Bendisi. And when he left, I took it on. He's also written some books, Connecticut Jerks, and a great historian of Connecticut. And so I took over the column, and originally it was kind of sort of looking at weird and quirky history when Ray had it. And I started leaning into this type of story where I would sort of hear this like almost like a legend or something that happened in Connecticut and kind of investigate whether it was true or not. I either find a historian who had done a lot of research on it or someone who knew a lot about it, or I'd look through archives myself. And as I went along, I got better and better at doing that. And sometimes you hear these stories in Connecticut that just are, they sound great. They're told a lot, but they're not true. An example is in Windsor Locks. They'll tell you people in Windsor Locks will get angry at you if you tell them that the first Christmas tree wasn't erected in the New World in Windsor Locks. There's a plaque, there's everything. Historical record just doesn't bear that out. Unfortunately, it's a story that, I at least from my perspective, doesn't hold up to scrutiny. So this story I heard about, one of my other specialties as a writer, I write a lot about history. I also write a lot about food and beer. I wrote a book about New England breweries. I write a column for Forbes on spirits of all kinds and alcohol and craft beverages of all kinds. And so my dad, who has always been kind of a bartending enthusiast and mixes his own cocktails and is obsessed with, sent me this article that he's like, oh, actually, Smirnoff Vodka started in Bethel. And I remember thinking, and I think I told Tom this earlier, I was like, that can't be right. It's not even in a, Smirnoff is a Russian company. That doesn't make any sense. I would have heard about that. But I started looking into it, and I saw that the story was out there. And I was like, okay, maybe this could be one of those good stories where you look into a local legend and then you sort of tell everyone there's no Santa Claus, that which and you can never go back to that town, which fortunately didn't happen here in Bethel because I live a few blocks away. But what ended up happening was when I looked into it, it is true and it does make sense once you hear the whole story. And so I wrote that article. And after that, I started, so I wrote that article, I want to say it was around 2018, 2017. I should have checked before I spoke here today. And then a couple years ago, a producer from the History Channel reached out. They were working on a story, the show Food That Built America. They look for stories of kind of iconic American brands, and they tell how they came to be in kind of dramatic fashion. They also have historic recreations and a really, like, I forget who the narrator is, but it's like one of the most intense voices you ever hear. So everything is very dramatic. And so they ended up inviting me on. I did some more research in preparation for that. And so this talk today is kind of a culmination of all that. So we are going to get into it. So vodka has long been, by 1934, a Ukrainian, he was often referred to as a Russian immigrant at that time, but he was from Ukraine, immigrant to the US, opens the first vodka distillery in the US. And this is the building. This is from 1958, courtesy of the Bethel Grapevine, which Hannah is here from the Bethel Grapevine today. Oh yeah. Yeah, so he opens this vodka distillery, and it's called Smirnoff. And it's a brand no one knows, and it's really a drink no one wants at this time. Americans are whiskey drinkers. They drink rum. They a little bit of gin, but vodka to them kind of lacks character. Um, and so we're going to tell you a little bit more about who Kuhne was, but I want to talk a little bit first about kind of um, where American drinking is at this time. So it's a strange time for alcohol in the U.S. in general. We've just gone through Prohibition. It's ended a couple months before the distillery opens. Um, that's kind of decimated a lot of the cocktail culture. There's this wonderful, rich culture, and it would take generations to recover. In the early 2000s, that's when you start seeing bartenders rediscovering, centuries old or a century old cocktails, such as the Last Word, and they would kind of find these old recipe books and then debut these cocktails and seem like geniuses because no one had ever drank them. They were popular way back when. So it took about 100 years to recover. And as part of that, but aspects of drinking culture do recover. Bourbon emerges as a big leader after Prohibition. It's got that sweet corn character. It's rye is not quite as popular, but still has, bourbon and rye have to be made in the U.S. They're legally and inherently American spirits. Vodka exists at this time. Sometimes you hear this story and it says like no one had ever heard of vodka in the US. And that's a little bit of exaggeration. Many people hadn't heard of it, but you can see it advertised in newspapers from Connecticut at the time. It was imported to the US. It was kind of a specialty item. One analogy, it's almost maybe like haggis, something that people didn't know that much about. And to compare it to haggis, they were wary of. They didn't like the idea of it. It had this really bad reputation. Some of that was a little bit warranted because there was a lot of poor quality vodka being produced in Russia. Some of that was actually, and I think the majority of it was actually sort of just sort of ignorance, kind of anti-immigrant sentiment. The same thing would happen years later. With tequila, people would talk about how it always gives you a hangover. That's not true if you're getting a good quality tequila. Same with vodka. People were saying it was, there's actually a quote from Rudolf Kunet where he says that, Americans, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but they think vodka causes hangovers and is made with moldy potatoes. There's a type of vodka that is made with potatoes, but not moldy ones. And it's no more likely to give you a hangover than any other spirit. It will give you a hangover if you drink enough of it. So yeah, vodka's been so now we're going to cross over to Russia and talk about what's kind of going over there. Vodka's been drinking for hundreds of years. Beer and what we go way back further, beer and wine predate beer, wine, cider, drinks of that nature predate distilled spirits. Distilled spirits are really perfected by the alchemists during the Middle Ages. And I always like to say they were searching for kind of the meaning of life and immortality, and instead they just gave us booze. They missed, but it was the early vodkas. Now Poland and Russia have a fierce debate over which country invented it. I'll let you guess. Poland thinks Polish. It was invented in Poland. Russia, and there's some. I haven't delved too deep into that debate, but there are some arguments to be made either way. It may have developed independently in each place. But the drink that's called vodka early on is similar, very similar to the drink, but it's different. It's more herbal. It's a lower alcohol content. We think. No, we're not quite sure. And like many early medicines, one of the fun things about alcohol history, there's this real link to kind of medicine, and a lot of it was often given as medicine, and also a link to kind of various religions. So you have a 1534 quote in which, herbs that vodka, work about herbs, and it says that vodka could serve to increase fertility and awaken lust. So no one drink too much when we have the tasting later. Be careful, keep that in mind. One of the earliest accounts of vodka production in Russia is from a Russian monk making vodka. And this kind of continues today. One of the great spirits that many bartenders are obsessed with is chartreuse. Are there any chartreuse drinkers around here? Can you find it? Yes, yeah. A couple years ago, demand for chartreuse went off the charts, and the Carthusian monks in the Alps who make it decided not to up production to meet that demand. They take a vow of silence, they make it. And so it's now very hard to get. Sometimes bottles go for a lot. And it's a great, very herbal, very unique mixer that's hard to replace. But yeah, so anyhow, that kind of idea that it doesn't really have much bearing on what we're going to talk about here today, but it's an interesting piece of the history of spirits, I think, both that medicinal background, and there's a great book, I think it's Doctors and Distillers, about sort of that medicine and history part. And I would like someone to write a book about the religious side as well. By the 1800s, vodka has evolved into the drink we know today. It's similar, it's very popular in vodka. It's not very popular elsewhere. And the Smirnoff Company emerges. It's founded by Pyotr Smirnoff. And he's got this great story as well. And there's a great biography about him that goes into detail about his life. He begins life as a serf. He kind of works his way up from an innkeeper or tavern keeper. He starts making vodka. And there is a lot of poor quality vodka. It's very unregulated. And the thing about spirits that you don't really realize, and I remember interviewing a Connecticut distiller once who had moved from brewing. And he's like, brewing's fun. You mess up while you're brewing a beer, and the beer doesn't taste that good. He's like, distilling is more of a challenge because when you mess up, people die. And I was like, well, that's not fun, but I can see why it's more of a challenge. And it really is when you make during Prohibition, there was bad batches of whiskey that went out and led to very severe side effects. There was actually a batch that the mafia out of Brooklyn was selling in Connecticut in the 1920s, and they kept having these warnings in the newspaper, like, don't drink it, it's poisoned, and people would still buy it. I guess they're like, I don't know, I'll take the risk. And a fair amount of people died. It's not super well known. So, that's also happening in Russia, similar type of thing earlier. And Smirnoff comes up with this idea of charcoal filtration. He pioneers it. I'm not 100% sure if he's the very first person, but he definitely popularizes it. And charcoal filtration can filter out all the impurities, so it can be a cleaner drink. It can also, it's also a safer drink. And I think that's part of what he's advertising, that this is, if you see the Smirnoff brand, you know that it's going to be a high quality drink that's safe to consume. And charcoal, activated charcoal, charcoal filtration is a great filtration system now. It's actually used in poison centers for some types of poison. If you have activated charcoal, it can absorb the poison. So he pioneers that. He does a lot of other. There's a lot. He uses skill for advertising. He's very successful. He ends up controlling 2/3 of vodka market in Moscow by the 1880s. He kind of buys off the church, and there's a real kind of, he's able to navigate a really difficult Russian society. There's a pretty big temperance movement that he's able to navigate for a time. But vodka production is eventually seized by the Tsar in 1904, and the surviving family ends up fleeing during the Bolshevik Revolution. They had kind of have a sort of two big strikes against them. By this point, they're a big capitalist family known for their wealth. And they're also a family that made alcohol, which is unpopular in a lot of different ways at the time. So Pierre Dur's grandson, Vladimir, he's running the company at this point, what's left of it. He flees. He gets caught by Bolshevik forces. He tells this really dramatic story. It sounds almost too good to be true, but it is the story he told about he's being taken by soldiers. They're ordered to kill him. He's being marched off. He's been a kind of a lifelong performer and the lover of the arts. He starts singing a song. The other prisoners join in, and basically the soldiers marching them towards the execution kind of forget to execute them. They're so moved by the music, they decide not to. If I had to guess, they were probably telling them they were going to execute them, or there was some sort of miscommunication there. But they might have, maybe it's possible it was chaotic time, so it's possible it's exactly how he tells it. He's saved. He escapes the Bolsheviks. He flees first to Turkey, ends up in France. There's not much left of the great fortune. It's this one of the big selling points of Smirnoff. It was favored by the Tsar, but the Tsar no longer exists. So that's not a great selling point anymore. So he starts selling the family name, the Smirnoff recipe and license. And that's really where we get back to Bethel. So Rudolf Kine, he sees this advertisement. He grew up. Rudolf has this kind of great story. His father had a plantation and blending facility for various spirits, so worked with the Smirnoffs in Ukraine. He is a really educated guy, has a doctorate in philosophy. He immigrates to New York City in the 1920s, again, sort of fleeing the kind of chaos of in Russia and sort of what would become Soviet states following World War I. He arrives penniless. He works as a salesman, first in oil, then in cosmetics, works his way up, does very well for himself, loves vodka, and thinks there's this opening in the market in the US. He's got this idea that, well, this is the most popular drink in vodka. I love it. People in the US are going to love it. And he's sort of right. He's ultimately right. But and he has this, he has this love of the Smirnoff brand. So he buys for 50,000 francs, around 50,000 in today's money. He buys the rights to Smirnoff. And he thinks that by selling Bethel produced Smirnoff bottles for $1.25 a bottle, which is less than for an imported bottle. It's $4 for an imported bottle. He thinks there's this way he's going to succeed. He gets a lot of press. It's the first in the country. News Times covers him. They quote Vladimir Smirnoff. Once Americans become acquainted with the purity of vodka as Russian royalty knew it, they will prefer it to all other beverages, says Vladimir Smirnoff to the News Times. The New Yorker also comes down. And I'm not going to read the whole story here. It might be too small, but the first paragraph is great because one of the reasons they chose the facility, which is right across, I think everyone in this crowd probably knows, but it's right across from Broken Symmetry, the building sort of in the back of Broken Symmetry across the train tracks. And I believe it's becoming condos, which, not to dissuade anyone from moving to Bethel, but that seems like a very close to the train track place to live. I do not know how you're going to sleep through that, but apologies to anyone selling real estate in the there. So learning that St. Pierre Smirnoff, Phil's hereditary vodka maker to the czars, had set up shop in, of all places, Bethel, Connecticut, we went around the other day when we found ourselves in the neighborhood and looked things over. Bethel, as you may know, is a small town near Danbury full of elm trees and white frame houses. The plant the Smirnoffs have settled in lays down by the railroad tracks, a low wooden building in New England factory style, flanked on one side by a lumber yard and on the other by a row of square-built cupola-topped dwellings. If it weren't for the larger white sign with the firm name and established Moscow 1880, you take it for a sash and door factory, which in fact it formerly was. Then he talks about how he's, Kuné is going to kind of change people's perception of vodka, how it's this great drink. And we actually have, which I am really excited. Alan brought this here today, which I have never seen. This is one of the bottles produced here in Bethel, a vodka bottle. He has given me permission to hand it around, but please do so very carefully. Yes. So I'm going to do that. Yeah, it is very cool. And you can see they recommend drinking it cold. Yeah, so that'll go around. Yeah, seeing if this was the New Yorker, July 28th, 1934. And as if anyone has ever worked in publicity, it's really hard to get people who write for the New Yorker to leave New York City to come to Connecticut. They'll go like around the world, but you can't get you always read these articles of people like from Brooklyn, and they're like, I went to the wilds of Connecticut, like this place no one's ever been. Couldn't so despite this great idea, and I think he was right, he fails. In the first year, he sells only 1,200 cases, 1,200 cases, which earns him about 25,000 in today's money. It is not a success, vodka. As I kind of touched upon, people are like, what is this flavor? It has no flavor. Why would you want a spirit without flavor? It's got no character. Not always fair. I don't think that's a fair. But if you're used to drinking whiskey, if you're used to drinking rum, there's less going on, and it's more subtle what's going on in vodka. And so the many drinkers in the U.S. are not interested in it. So then what he decides to do is he decides out of desperation, he has to sell. And he sells to another Connecticut company, not a Bethel company, but a company out of Hartford, G.F. Hebline and Brothers. And one of the fun things about this story is you start to see the way sort of trends are cyclical. Hebline had been famous before Prohibition for producing pre-mixed cocktails. And now one of the big trends in beverages and one of the big sellers, one of the things that's the fastest growing segment, it might even be the fastest growing alcohol segment right now, are ready to drink cocktails. And they became big. They kind of exploded during the pandemic. People weren't going out. They still wanted to, have a cocktail. They didn't know how to mix it themselves or want to go through the hassle. But it's actually something that is very old. It's a very old idea. They were doing it, even in the 1800s, late 1800s. During Prohibition, Hebline survives by making a product many people are familiar with as well, A1 original sauce. It was a good pivot for them. So they made a steak sauce that's quite famous. But after Prohibition ends, they want to get back into the liquor business, and they start offering their pre-mixed cocktails again. But they're importing their spirits, and they want to start producing some of it in-house. And the 31-year-old grandson of the company's founder, John G. Martin, is involved with this decision. And he's really this great great Connecticut character. His family has this castle, Hebline Tower, which is modeled on a Bavarian castle. That's in Simsbury, and you can see it for miles and miles around. It's a great walk if you're ever up in that area. There's also some places to drink at the foot of the mountains. So he's born in England, educated at Cambridge. He's a self-proclaimed buccaneer in business, and he's just someone who, when you read interviews with him and how he did business, he really enjoyed the game of, getting people to try a new product. He really had a lot of fun doing it. Yeah, the bottle of Smirnoff is still going around if you haven't had a chance to look at that. And so instead of paying Cunett $50,000, Martin offers him $14,000, which is almost nothing, but agrees to hire him and give him royalties on every bottle of Smirnoff sold. So Cunett becomes an employee of Hebline, and it ends up becoming a really good partnership for both of them. Vodka leaves Bethel, sadly. The production facility is moved, but the story of vodka in the US is really just beginning. And something I probably didn't clarify enough in the beginning is that this is the Smirnoff. There's really no other Smirnoff at this point. This is all, Cunett bought the North American rights, but no one else that we really know of is producing it in any substantial way. So this is the Smirnoff we know today. It really is an American company and has been since the beginning, with roots that, go into Russia. Smirnoff production pauses during World War II. I guess there was an alcohol shortage. I'm not exact, or there was reasons they needed the alcohol. I'm actually not sure why. Torpedoes, is that what? I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that was like, yeah, they sent it to soldiers. So they paused vodka production. Kind of reminds me about back in 2020 when a lot of Connecticut distilleries started making hand sanitizer. It was something they could easily do. And for a little bit, they switched over to that. After the war, Americans start getting interested in vodka. There's some theory that, maybe U.S. soldiers got used to it while they were in Europe. Maybe they met Russian soldiers who told them about it. The world's becoming a little bit more of a global place, for sure. But it's not, it's still a specialty item. Smirnoff is doing okay. They're not doing great. So in 1949, Smirnoff is selling annually 120,000 cases. By 1955, it's selling more than 1 million cases. And how they're able to grow in that way is a really interesting story, kind of in advertising and reframing. Because if you remember the criticism, why people weren't really drawn to vodka is that they felt that it was flavorless. It didn't really have any character. And Martin sort of realizes that, and his team realizes that that's not really so much a weakness. They could take that criticism and they can make it a strength. Because vodka, one of the things about it is it's kind of a chameleon. It can become a part of anything, and it can lend itself to anything. You could take an orange. See it circled back. Take an orange and squeeze some orange juice, put in vodka. It doesn't really matter how much. It's going to taste pretty good. It's going to be masking the flavor. It disappears. And it's almost, and this isn't, that sounds like a diss for vodka lovers. I don't mean it this way because I think vodka does have a great flavor, but it becomes a great drink for those people who sometimes don't like the taste of alcohol, who want to mask the alcohol flavor with whatever they're drinking. Vodka cranberry, the screwdriver, orange juice, and vodka, pretty much anything you can imagine. And last, but certainly not least, one of the drivers of vodka's success is going to be the Moscow Mule. And there's a couple different stories about how this came about. Smirnoff is involved in its production. This is one story that ran in the New York Herald Tribune from 1948. Kuhne has a different story. He tells in New Yorker a couple years later. So it's not exactly clear where it went, but the Cock and Bull bar was involved in it. Jack Morgan had this idea of he's going to import ginger beer, which is really popular in England, and Americans are going to love it. And the story goes that just like vodka early on, they don't really like it. I'm not a big fan of ginger beer myself. I like it in cocktails, but not plain. The ginger is too much. But so you have these kind of two products, vodka and ginger. That's neither ginger beer. Neither one is doing quite as well as they hope. And Morgan, with probably help from the Smirnoff company, Martin, Kuhne, they decide to combine these ingredients into one winning drink, adding some initially lemon juice. Now it's usually lime, and creating a drink called the Moscow Mule. And the timing of this drink's success is very strange because the Cold War is really heating up. Tensions with Russia are very high in the late 1940s after World War II. But I kind of think that almost plays into the drink success, that it's kind of like tongue in cheek. You're going to have this Moscow drink. It also is a great, easy to make drink. It's very refreshing. The vodka sort of disappears into it, but also tastes really good. And in any case, it becomes this incredibly popular drink that helps drive the product into more and more people's mind. So that plays a big role in getting more people to drink Smirnoff and therefore vodka in general. What then happens a couple years later, in the 50s, they have this kind of advertising gold campaign and really dig into the flavorless side of it. After initial shipments of vodka did surprisingly well in Columbia, South Carolina, Martin was determined to find out why. We had a salesman down there, and he had put up a great streamer, Smirnoff white whiskey, no smell, no taste. Martin told this to the Hartford Times in 1964. And no smell, no taste doesn't necessarily sound like that great a thing, but people see it as a way that, one, you could get rid of the flavor of alcohol, as we talked about, and two, which I don't recommend, you can drink and then go back to work. It's not true, by the way. So not only is it not great practice, you will still smell alcohol breath, but the idea is that the marketing campaign is claiming that no one will know you're drinking. That water bottle there could be vodka for all we know. And that starts to be a selling point. They refine it. Milton Goodman refines it to Smirnoff leaves you breathless. And they have this get on the vodka wagon with Smirnoff vodka. It leaves you breathless. A bunch of different celebrities, including Groucho Marx, that's not him pictured here, but get on this campaign, and it's a really successful magazine campaign. Vodka sales keep going up. It's starting to take its place in society, in U.S. society. And then in one of the great moments of product placement of all time, we have Martin decides to invest in a new movie that's coming out. And as the Food That Built America episode I was on, the very dramatic narrator voice puts it, in 1962, Martin secures a deal to place Smirnoff on the silver screen. The film is an adaptation of a series of novels from a British author about a jet-setting, womanizing, lethal secret agent. But the low-budget picture is said to be, quote, too British and, quote, too blatantly sexual. Martin sticks to his guns, believing the film will be the perfect platform to launch vodka's new, refined image. It's called Dr. No, and it's the first James Bond film, and we're going to try to see if we can have a clip from it. Whenever I show a clip from YouTube, it usually is preceded by the most obnoxious ad you could ever imagine. So we'll see what that is. I don't know if you can see it right here is a Smirnoff bottle, and this is in Dr. No, and so we'll keep going.
One medium dry vodka martini, mixed like you said, sir, and not stirred. Anything else, sir? No, that's all. Well done, sir. Thanks, Mr. Brown. You decide the last you are. Medium dry martini, lemon peel, shaken, not stirred. Vodka? Of course. We'll have dinner at once.
Something for you, Mr. Bond?
Just a drink. A martini, shaken, not stirred. Do you have any leads of your own?
Okay, this will continue for a while because he orders it in every film. But it's a significant thing because, for years, vodka, sort of bartending enthusiasts, drink snobs, in the 2000s for the last 20 years have been kind of moaning about the vodka martini, that it's not as good a martini as with gin. And that was true back even in the day that a lot of purists felt gin did a better martini. So part of the genius of this is getting people to switch over to vodka, to make a vodka martini cool, because really, who's cooler than James Bond? So and it's kind of a signature drink. They'll also tell you that shaking it makes it worse, that if you AB it, most people will prefer it not shaken. But the vodka martini in recent years has been making a comeback. It's always been popular, but even the so-called experts or the sort of alcohol snobs, the cocktail nerds, they've been coming around that they think it can be really good with a really dirty martini with more olives. And this yet again pushes the success of vodka even further. So it's got now the martini becomes with vodka becomes one of the most popular cocktails. Vodka is still the most popular mixer. The fastest growing, I believe the most popular cocktail in the US is the margarita, followed pretty close behind by the espresso martini, which features vodka, coffee liqueur, and espresso. So today, vodka is the most popular drink in the US. It was Smirnoff was for many years the most popular brand. It was eventually surpassed in recent years by Tito's. The vodka martini is making a comeback, as I mentioned, and I think I touched upon it earlier. So are canned cocktails, and so a lot of the story is moving around, going full circle. Also, the idea of vodka that sort of Rudolf Kuhn originally tried to sell it as a spirit to drink, either chilled or unchilled. That's starting to make a comeback. There are many sort of craft vodka distilleries that are talking about how their vodka is good enough to drink plain. And vodka has sort of less apparent flavor than some other spirits, and some vodkas can be flavorless, but the base ingredient you use to create a vodka does change the final flavor. Vodka is unusual with spirits in that it is based upon how it ends up. So you can make it with anything, as opposed to bourbon, which has to be made with at least 50% corn, rye, which has to be made with a specific amount of rye, tequila, which has to be made with agave and made in one of the tequila producing regions in Mexico. So vodka is different in that, and that adds to some of the variations in its character. One of the things I taste for is, you often hear a drink described as smooth. Vodka, not so good vodka can have a really harsh burn. So you want that burn to be kind of subtle and soft, or at least I do. You can get little tastes, little hints of different flavors like vanilla, in a really well done vodka. Jason Momoa, I had a chance to interview him late last year. If you can't tell the difference between us, we get mistaken for each other a lot. That's me over there. He has a vodka brand called Miele Vodka, and him and his partner on the project, Blaine Halverson, who's a fashion designer, we're really familiar with the story of vodka and how it changed into something that you only use as a mixer. And they're part of their brand's goal is to make it a sipper, something you drink neat. There are other vodka companies doing that as well. So it started again, coming full circle. Vodka remains the most popular spirit in the US. It is losing ground, at least it has been, to tequila. It's losing ground to ready-to-drink cocktails. THC seltzers are kind of growing fast. And there's also a lot of people just not drinking. So it's an unusual time before we even talk about tariffs, which have thrown into have added more uncertainty. Meanwhile, in Bethel, and probably some people in this room know this story a little bit better than I do. I haven't done as much work on what happened to the building after Smirnoff left. I always thought that it's obviously not going to happen now because there are going to be condos there. I always thought it would be a great place for a Connecticut distillery to do vodka. And it was a big empty space for a long time. But it was home to the Topstone Rubber Mask Company for many years. Does anyone here remember that company? They make these creepy masks back here, which look maybe a little bit more scary than they would in real life. I always pronounced this wrong, but it was home to Boggy Woodworking. Thank you. And I understand one of them was quite a character. I've heard a lot of great stories. And I think, and this is kind of a thing, I don't know what it would be, but I think Bethel as a town could do a little bit more with this story because it is such a great story. It was the birth of American vodka. It created what has become the biggest selling spirit in the country for decades. And it didn't really have to go that way. That's at the end of the History Channel story. It's hard to say what predict an alternate path through history, but vodka could have Rudolph could have closed shop, and vodka could have kind of sputtered in the US, and you could have found it maybe at a liquor store the same way you can find cachaça, Brazilian rum, but it's not a big part of American drinking. You could find sake has started to come into the US and become more popular, but for many years it was something, again, you could find. It's not impossible to find, but it's not available everywhere. So that's, I think, something, the town, at least I'd love to see a plaque in the new building. Yeah, I'd actually love to see someone should do a Bethel vodka. There is. Oh, that is awesome. That is great news. And I would love to see maybe a distillery produce a Connecticut. It'd be a little tricky because Smirnoff is still a company. They were owned by Diageo, and they were in Norwalk for many years. So it's a little tricky to do a nod to that, but I think you could do that without mentioning Smirnoff. That's it. I want to stop here. Leave time for questions, and we also have some vodka to taste. Yes. So vodka doesn't have the botanicals of gin. Gin has to be made with juniper. It has to have some other botanicals in it, so it has a very floral flavor. Aquavit, I forget. I think that Swedish, yeah. Yeah, so so actually I should say vodka by law in the US has to be neutral tasting, and it actually, I think, includes language around like flavorless, so it shouldn't have any of those botanicals. You could do a flavored vodka, so I'm not exactly that kind of changes that, but it has to start as a neutral spirit. So vodka is always sort of flavorless, and that's one way, almost one characteristic of it. Vodka. Oh, it can be made with it. No, so grain alcohol would still have they would still have a lot of that sweetness. It would still have too much. I think, sort of like moonshine will have like, it has flavor, not always good flavor. Um, yeah. He was a partner for a long time. I think he retired with the company. When he died, he ended up moving to California, but he did all right. Yeah. Um, yeah. So it ended up being a very good deal for I think everyone concerned. Like every kind of one of those everyone won, which is great because sometimes someone sells the company too soon and then goes on. Yes.
You can make that today, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And then I've been in the distillery there, they.
Years. Yeah. I-
And I've been to liquor stores purely educational.
Yes. 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 So like us all. Yeah.
But during. How
Well, so vodka.
advertising or?
Pretty much. Dale DeGroff, who's kind of known as the king of cocktails and is this great. He's a bartender at the Rainbow Room and wrote one of the pioneers of sort of the cocktail renaissance. He says that vodka, what is basically what's premium or not with vodka is decided by the sales department and what people are willing to pay for it. And to your point, that's true also of I think that's true even of bourbon, which has to be aged for a while. Some, I've had $200 bourbons that
Well,
yes, and there still is though, so it's still time consuming, but to a certain extent, well, aged spirits cost more inherently because they're more expensive to produce. So vodka is more, I think the premium is more sort of random in what people are willing to pay than other spirits. But it still happens, if you have a 5-year bourbon, let's say, you still can have this huge price gauge, price range, which sometimes says something about quality, but sometimes does not. There's I get sent a lot of different spirits and some that I would never I get to try that I would never buy. They're really good. Usually if you're charging more than $100 or $200 for a bottle, it's usually pretty good. It's not always better than, the $20, $30, $40 bottle if you get the right one. Yes, I think we had a question there right for them.
so I'm going into what room is that in the first place, and what's the feedstock?
So I never came across him saying exactly what drew him to Bethel. I know the location, the train was something that appealed to him, the train access. I don't know exactly if there was anything really beyond that. I suspect just the way people have distilleries these days, it was kind of like he was looking for a space that he could put stuff on the train, and that was probably the one that, its proximity to New York, where he had lived. That I believe was it, but not sure. And I can't quite remember what Smirnoff was using at that time, and it's probably changed over the years. I'm not sure if they disclose it, but he was saying that there is a quote of Rudolf Kane saying that we're going to use that, unlike in Russia where they might use potatoes, they're using grain of some type for their vodka. Yeah, that's a great point. So one of what was yeah, I remember. So there is it's not it's not always clear, but they will um you'll hear things like triple distilled, twice distilled, and that was one of the selling points of Smirnoff early on, that they were in addition to the charcoal filtration, they were distilling it extra times, which is gonna, generally speaking, not always make any spirit smoother. A lot of Irish whiskeys are, triple distilled. And that's why they tend to be not necessarily better than other types of whiskeys, but they tend to be a little smoother. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So you're saying that Tito's is number one now. Is that because of all the like stuff and it, when people they can drink Tito's versus Smirnoff if they're on a diet that's carb free?
Oh, I didn't know that. I did that could be a factor. I think Tito's. I don't know actually. Corn. Does anyone know what Tito's is made with as a base? Potato. So it's gluten free. That could be a factor. Tito's, I think, also was like the first sort of craft American vodka. They really advertised that well. They became synonymous with quality. Smirnoff had a little bit of a reputation problem where it's considered like this vodka that people drink at dorm parties. It does very well at It does very well in blind taste tests still, and sometimes better when people don't know that it's Smirnoff as opposed to when they do know. I think we had a question over here.
Yeah, a number of nations that did traditional and produced vodka, gotten into the how their products.
Oh yeah, so I actually should have linked to it, a story at the end of the year on my favorite vodkas of 2024. And it was pretty spread out, and I'll do blind little taste testings. I think there's a vodka from Iceland I had that I really liked, Reykjavik. American vodka is doing a lot of vodka as well. There was an Irish vodka, an Irish potato vodka that was great. I tried and was kind of, I'd never really heard of an Irish vodka or thought it would be good. So there's a lot of vodkas being produced internationally that are great. There's a sort of there's a vodka being made with agave, like a little bit of agave, partially produced I think it's produced in Mexico, or at least they're working. And Weber vodka, that's pretty good. I don't love agave; it's kind of an endangered species. So if you're not making it for tequila or mezcal, I don't know why you need to add it to vodka, but it's already kind of ecosystem-wise, the demand is not good. But yeah, so there's vodka being produced in a lot of different countries now, and a lot of them are doing a really good job. I think a lot of the smaller producers, with spirits, unlike I think with craft beer, which I've written a lot about, almost always when you go to a good local brewery, it's going to be better than what you can pick up in a liquor store because the freshness is going to play such a big role. Whereas with whiskey, whiskey stays pretty well. So it doesn't really matter if it's coming over from Scotland, Scotch, it's going to taste good, and they have been doing it for so long sometimes. So sometimes the smaller producers are really good, but the best are, in my opinion, sometimes the best are still like the brands you've heard about in some cases. But with vodka, I've been pretty impressed with some of these smaller vodkas that you haven't heard about. Momoa's vodka is really good. That's made out of in America, and that has a really nice, like they're really like you don't need to chill it, and which is kind of a bold way of doing it, and I think it actually is one of the better celebrity spirits out there. A lot of times they're not that good. We have some Smirnoff here today. Only.
Just had a quick check online. Tito's said they're made out of premium corn, Smirnoff grain, but they don't specify.
Which, yeah. Actually don't know. It's not in Connecticut. I'm not sure. There's a lot of they don't specify the grain. There's a lot of lack of transparency in the spirit world, and it can be pretty interesting. Someone once pitched me a story, and it was too much. I haven't had the chance to dive into it, but even age, when they say that this is 8-year-old bourbon that's been aging for 8 years in barrels, that's kind of totally unregulated. So in theory, can be a lot of fraud with that too. So there could be definitely more transparency. It's not the same where it's I don't know that, the fact that Smirnoff is not saying what they're making it with, not even saying we vary between these 7, grains depending on, because they could probably get it to taste pretty similar. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Well, yeah, it has I did a story for Forbes about tequila. Tequila producers are obviously not happy with it. It's a product that cannot be produced in the US, so it's not a product that, you can turn. You can make an agave spirit, but you can't call it tequila. So so that's going to be kind of disrupted. It's already very difficult for reasons I don't fully understand to bring a product to market in the US from another country. The labeling is expensive. There's a 3-tier system that you have to go through of wholesalers and retailers to get to customers. So there is talk that a lot of producers of various spirits are maybe less likely to, certainly smaller producers, to bring. It's going to be more challenging than ever before to bring a sort of a foreign spirit to market in the US. And that could have some effects on retailers and restaurant owners and that kind of thing. It's kind of unclear. It's just a lot of uncertainty. And on top of that, there'd already been a lot of uncertainty because, there's a lot less drinking. Well, not a lot, but, some of the growth in, there's only so much people can drink to begin with. And so some of that growth is being challenged. Young people are drinking less. I'm sorry sad news. No, they are. And again, I think, the THC seltzers are a bigger deal. I didn't realize they're kind of fully legal in Connecticut now. And you'll see them, at Carluzzi's. Yes, there's a question in. Yeah. So thank you. No, and yeah, no. Uh-huh. Any other questions? No one's asking, but my hair, I use mostly natural product in it. Yeah.
Erik, thank you so very much. This is so interesting.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the best.
Join us at the table.
Yes, we have vodka to drink now. This is everyone should have drank before I talked then.
First year that the first